we're going to put our leader hat on. Okay, we're going to put our leader hat on, and we're going to put our learner hat on, or our teacher hat on, as we start to dive more deeply into the resources and the approach that drove this design. And I keep thinking of this question of, how the heck am I going to actually get this to happen in all my classrooms? Okay, so we're going to start to think a little bit more about what's underlying the this. So we're going to pull back the curtain, and as I think the folks who were talking about this, like this design, this really intentional design, this plan the teacher had, we're going to think a little bit more about what are the research-based strategies? What is in the plan to create this kind of learning? What's in the recipe? And that's going to really lead us into tomorrow as we start to think about the how do you as leaders start to work toward your vision. What are the tools you need in your toolkit? And so this question we're going to use to kind of drive our afternoon is just like, if we're supporting teachers to facilitate more effective science instruction that actually is going to prepare students for these new TEKS, what the heck does that take? What does that include? So I'm going to share just a little bit of the instructional model. So I'm going to just start with the routines here that were in the design of this curriculum. And some of you noticed this wasn't accidental. This wasn't just students off exploring. That teacher knew where she was going. There was a plan. And so in this instructional unit and all the Open SciEd units, there are, just like there's very careful norms, very clear norms, there's a really clear routine for the instructional design. And so you can see here, in where we really live today was that anchoring phenomenon routine. Okay, so what we really did was, the purpose of what we did and what students do in the first 4 lessons of that unit is about curiosity to drive the learning. And it was based on our experience with that common observable event, that phenomenon of Mount Everest, that shaking, the earthquake happening. That is going to drive our learning. We're going to start to make connections. We're going to start to ask questions. We didn't learn a ton of content, but that's okay because we're going to continue. We have other routines then with the navigation routine, investigation, putting the pieces together, and even then problematizing. So finishing up and saying, did we learn enough what we need to? Do we still have things we need to understand? There's a really clear design here. So I'm going to show you what this looks like for you visual learners who like pictures in a graphic. Okay, so in the Open SciEd instructional model, and again, this is one approach to this 3-dimensional learning. It's not the only approach, but I'm going to share one with you here to think about it. You can see here it starts with this shared experience of the phenomenon, in this case, observing the earthquake, going through then the anchoring phenomenon routine, which leads us to have some questions on the driving question board. From there, students are going to do some investigation. Okay, they're going to, in that investigation, they're going to gather evidence, and they're going to put that evidence together into some sort of consensus of what we figured out so far. From there, students are going to say, but now I have new questions emerging, and I'm going to need to investigate some more. So then they go back through an investigation routine, gather more evidence, and then they, at the end of the unit, and this is every unit, this is an instructional model, they put the pieces together about what have we learned and how can we explain, finally, at the end of the unit, not after 4 days, but in this case, after, this is about a 30-day unit, how do we explain what's going on Mount Everest, and probably some other things we've identified are related in the way, along the way. And in this case of this unit, students start to realize that there's something going on Mount Everest, but this is also related to volcanoes. This is also related to deep sea vents. So they start to, they have multiple phenomena that they put together and they explain by the end of the unit. Then finally, they come back together and they visit their driving question board and say, hey, we've answered a lot of our questions. This is great. Okay, that is one instructional model, one approach to this 3-dimensional learning, not the only one, but one we wanted to share with you today to start to have a concrete example. And Joe's going to pass out, we do have the full storyline of this Open SciEd unit. So if you're curious, like, it doesn't seem like students did a lot in the 4 days. Where did they go? What did they figure out? This is just a resource for you to have sort of the big picture of the story. So I'll give you a minute just to look at that, to wrap your brain around. Beyond the first lesson, which you guys dipped your toe in the water, what does this look like over, in this case, this is a 14 lesson unit. All right, so take a few minutes to scan that unit storyline, kind of see how the story progresses over a number of lessons. That's a great question. Does the 4 units cover the entire TEKS? I don't know because I haven't done this analysis, and this program was not designed for the TEKS. This program was designed for the NGSS. So one thing I do know for sure is I saw the DCI Joe put up, the core idea that Joe put up. The big idea is this Connect 2 is actually a 7th grade idea. This unit falls in the Open SciEd end of 6th grade year. So what we're not saying right now is like, this is the program you could take and start to roll out tomorrow in your district. For any curricula you're going to select and begin to implement, you're going to need tools and processes to evaluate the alignment to your standards. We're going there. That's like, I don't know, next summer. That's part of our learning together, is those questions of what are best practices for evaluating instructional materials. Our purpose today is just to start to say, like, what does this 3-dimensional stuff look like? What does the design look like? And we're going to continue to dig a little deeper into that question of, like, what are these research-based strategies that can support this kind of teaching in the classroom? And to do that, I'm going to turn it over to Joe.
Thank you, ma'am. Okay, we are going to work. No, go ahead. We are going to work with 5 different articles. So most of you have 5 people. If you have 6 people, we'll be happy to give you another set of an article in case you need it. You can choose the one that you want. We have plenty of extras. Okay? So the first thing I'm going to ask you to do is decide who's going to read which article. And then I need you to put the articles down so we can get prepared. So what I'm going to ask you to do is each of you are going to read your article, and we'll give you about 10 minutes to do that. I know that's a kind of a swift time, but we're trying to get you out on time. And so 10 minutes to read the article, and at the same time, you are entering your important notes in the document underneath the heading for the article that is yours. But putting 10 minutes on the clock, and we want you to really think about these 2 questions. How does this support an equitable classroom culture where all students have access? And the second is, how does this support students in figuring out the phenomenon? Okay. Those are the 2 questions you're going to center your notes around.
Hopefully you're getting some good tools in your toolkit about the how to achieve this vision of effective science teaching and learning. And we want to come back to some of our initial ideas from this morning and just give you a chance to revise some of your thinking about effective science teaching and learning based on what you experienced today. So you're going to see your charts you made this morning. Oops. That is not fun. All right. Your charts you made this morning have magically moved closer to where you're at. And so what I'm going to have you do is take a look with your team at what you wrote about what students are doing in an effective science teaching and learning classroom, what students are doing, what teachers are doing. And there's another piece we talked a lot about today, which is the classroom culture. Okay? What I'm going to ask you to do is talk as a group. I'm going to give you 10 minutes to talk as a group and put as many new ideas on Post-its, stick them up on your chart, okay? Many new ideas as you have as possible, put them on your chart. So writing those ideas on Post-its, adding them. If there's something you wrote this morning that you're like, that's not that important after all, feel free to cross that out as well. I'm sure everything you said this morning is already amazing though, so continue to add and revise if necessary ideas. Beautiful connection to where we're going tomorrow. And before we do a little preview of tomorrow, I want to do what I think in leading adult professional learning is one of the most important things, which is creating that space for you all to step back and think about your own thinking. So we already see some ways your thinking has changed on these posters. But I'm going to give you just two really, really precious moments, either alone in your journal or in your note-taking document, to reflect on these two questions. The first one is just, what about today's session made my own learning effective? So thinking about your own thinking in the design of today's session, what helped you learn? What made this experience effective for you? And then the second piece is taking back to your work as a leader. What have you learned today that you want to make sure you remember for your work as a science leader? All right. So I'll give you 2 minutes to write.
Okay. I wanted to share my reflection just kind of to close out the day. You know, I just want to remind you all where we started today. I told you a story about my experience running a marathon. And I would be lying to you if I told you that I had, at the beginning, any confidence that I could actually do it. It seemed like an impossible task. And I also had evidence after a couple of years that I wasn't really making the progress that I hoped that I would make. I was like, I'm not getting close enough to being number one in any marathon. And so I had to change everything. I had to change how I trained. I had to change what I was eating. I had to get a new coach. I had to change my mindset. And then it started to emerge as a real possibility. And then I tried to change the system factors. It could lead me to that outcome. And so today, as I ate lunch with folks, I've been sitting at tables with people, I've heard things like, I don't know if we can get all of our teachers to teach like this. Like, we are just trying to find subs right now. I heard things like, are you guys going to help us design these units so that we can deliver this? I heard things like, will we have the time in the school year to do a reflection activity and all this question and answer when we have so much content to cover? And I'm going to go back to the story and my first question for you and why I gave you all shoelaces, which is, are you ready to run? And are you ready to lead? And are you ready to set a goal for yourself and your team that, similar to my goal, is different than what you're doing now? It seems impossible, maybe for you, maybe it doesn't seem impossible, but maybe it does when you think about all the changes that need to happen. When you saw the lesson up here and you thought, can we get all of our teachers to actually teach like that? Could we squeeze it into a unit, a year? Could we still achieve the outcomes that we want to? Because it's a risk, right? You're saying we're going to teach different, we're going to use different materials. That's a risk because you know what you know now. You don't know what happens if you change. And so my push and my thought for you is, you're the leaders. So the things that you grab hold of from our sessions, you know, how you organize it, what you adopt, what you adapt, and how you implement it, that's up to you. You're the ones that are going to run the race. You're the ones that are going to set the goal. And so, are you ready to run?